Please in order if you'll join me in the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The first item is the adoption of the agenda.
I move to adopt the agenda as presented.
Second.
The second, all those in favor? Okay. The first item we have is the gating criteria. We've got some folks that want to speak to us on that. Is Brayden in here?
Mr. Brady, right here is our timer, so you can have 3 minutes to speak and then we'll go off. You ready?
Yeah. And Brayden, if you wouldn't mind for us elderly people with poor hearing, you can ask us.
Yeah.
I can read those. Okay, go ahead.
Good evening. My name is Braden Boderwick, and I'm a senior at Newton High School. I'm one of the 4 team captains representing the high school football team this year. I'd like to start off by thanking you for taking the time to allow us to speak with you tonight. It is our understanding that one of the items on the agenda will be to discuss the future of fall sports. Our team understands the near impossible decisions you must make to ensure the safety of the students of USC 373. We are here to tell you that we want to be a part of the solution. We want to ensure the safety of everyone around us while also allowing us the opportunity to do what we love most, which is play football. Football has had a profound impact on my life. I am sure the same would be said by my teammates. Football allows us to stay physically fit. It has helped us learn to work as a team. It has helped us learn to keep moving forward, no matter what roadblocks lay in our way. We struggle together, we fight together, we endure together. We problem solve together. Together, we can do anything we put our minds to. I am certain that if you allow us to continue our season, we will try our hardest to stay safe, to stay healthy together. Our team has already been following the guidelines given to us, and we will continue to follow those regulations to keep us safe while practicing and competing. There are no guarantees in life, but we will try our hardest because we want to play football. I'm not sure if you are aware of the guidelines that were given, but they include wearing a mask, standing 6 feet apart when not practicing, competing, or working out, wiping down our helmets and our shoulder pads, sanitizing our hands, and not sharing water bottles. Most recently, our AD, Mr. Brian Becker, purchased the entire team face shields that are installed inside the face mask or our helmets. They create a clear barrier between us and our opponents. You may have seen these masks being worn by many college programs. We request that you allow fall sports to continue as planned. I know that my team, as well as the other fall sports, would be forever grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. The next person is David Smith.
Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak with you tonight. My name is David Smick. I'm a senior captain at Newton High School. I would like to first start by extending warm greetings, and I would like to say we were promised that the continuation of sanitation and making sure our players are healthy before coming to practice as continuing temperature checks and cleaning our equipment, stuff like that. Braden mentioned also the face shields have been put on our helmets. That will help ensure that we have and we're working still on them to keep them clean. Sanitation is everything. And that's it. I just want to promise to you guys that if you guys give us our season, we will continue to sanitize everything, and we will continue to social distance, wear masks when we have to, temperature checks before we go into school or use any school equipment. That's it. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name's Doug Mick. Davis is my son. I have two sons that play football at Newton High School. Davis, a senior, and Christopher, a junior. I know I can say that these kids have been working extremely hard. I sent a letter to a lot of you folks and superintendent. I've seen how hard they've been working, even if whether it's at home or on the field, lifting weights, boot camp, all those sorts of things. They've really worked hard this summer. They've kept their spirits up during this trying time. It's been hard, but they've done a good job with that. I think the coaches have really helped them out. The coaches are making sure they're safe. They're doing everything they're supposed to do, following protocols. I also wanted to say, I think in my letter to some of you, I said that, as a parent, we're extremely concerned about the health of our kids. We wouldn't allow them to be out there, if we were afraid that they're going to get sick or, have problems with COVID. These kids are all in very good shape. Like I said, the coaches watch out for them. They do everything they can to keep them safe. We feel that they're safe as parents. There's a lot more risky things they could be involved in if they weren't in sports. I'm not saying that these kids will, but there's other things that they could be involved in that could be much, much worse and put them at greater risk than playing football or any other sport or activity during this season. So, in closing, I just want to say thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Dana Steinmetz. I've lived in Newton for over 30 years. I'm a graduate of Newton High School, Bethel College, where I met my husband, who's from Oregon. And we chose Newton from Oregon, a gorgeous state, because of the community we have here and how good our schools are and what a village this is. And I do believe it takes a village to raise kids. I know many of you on the board, and I voted for many of you because I have faith in you. I know you're going to do what's best for our children. I know you're going to advocate for them. What our kids have been doing all summer shows how dedicated they are to our community. They've done, two of my boys have done Eagle Scout projects this summer alone for our community. They've worked all summer full-time in different businesses around our community. They've masked the entire time. They've helped customers. And they've done this gladly because they want to go back to school. They want to be in school. They want to be in their sports. One of my sons is very involved in the VOTEC program at Newton High School. He is involved in the machining classes. He'll be a junior. That was a real struggle last year when we had to go online because the VOTEC stuff is very difficult for them to translate through the internet. I know he had a lot of struggles, and if it is the same way this year, it's going to be hard for a lot of children. They do so much for our community, and these are just a couple of examples of my boys doing Eagle Scout projects. I know the Mick boys have, a lot of the football players have. I know a couple of our football players have signed to serve in the military after they're done. And I just ask you guys to let them play their final seasons of school. Let them be in school. Let them be kids. They've shown so much responsibility. I won't talk about the football things because you guys have already heard what they've been doing for their football, what their safety is. But I feel like that some people may be afraid, and I understand that. And I'm not underplaying anyone's feelings in this case. But I feel like there's a dangerous temptation to give into that fear. And I'm not raising my children to give into fear. I think that's very, very dangerous. Our job as parents and on the board is to advocate for the children in the future. And I feel like letting them go to school, letting them, our parents make the decision on their behalf is what needs to happen right now. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Carrie, is it?
Hi. My comments aren't really about the sports program, but more the academics at Santa Fe and at the elementary school level. I think most of the board members received an email from me this morning. I have a daughter that is a type 1 diabetic at Santa Fe this year, and I also have a daughter at Chisholm. I am concerned because when we were given the option to make our decision versus remote versus flexible, the flexible was explained to us as it'll be in different modes, 5 days a week, hybrid, or remote, depending on the numbers. Last week, when Mr. Van Ryken was doing his Q&A, I heard the word modified for the very first time. I never heard that before. I spoke to him the next morning, and he told me that K through 6 would be there because he didn't feel it was good for children to be home alone, and that's why he was making that decision. I think the board's overstepping, to be honest. I think some decisions need to be from the parents. I don't think it's right for everybody here to put my child in danger. If it's a DCF issue, call DCF on the parents. It's causing problems and not taking care of their children. I don't want my daughter going 5 days a week if it's not safe for 7th through 12th graders to go 5 days a week. There should be no distinguishing there. If it's 7th through 12th grader, if it's not safe for them and they have to go in hybrid, 5th and 6th grade should have to go to hybrid as well. And I think it's wrong the way that was just slid in without anybody ever mentioning that the modified program was something we were going to. I feel as a parent deceived, and I've lost all faith in the board. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And next thing we'll do is start working our way through the skating criteria, correct?
Yes, yes. And we're gonna I'm going to pull up what was shared last week with our Board of Education and our committee. The committee has worked hard on these things. And I just kind of want to make sure that I can get back.
Cheering out there.
When we had met last week, I presented to you a gating matrix, a gating criteria. We had received, just kind of give some background and history about this, we received the initial gating criteria from the State Department of Education. I believe it was the Wednesday prior, maybe at the end of the day on Tuesday. We received information from Dr. Watson on how this could be applied to schools. We met as a committee with 3 board members and several other several other school people and health professionals from the Harvey County Health Department, as well as our nursing staff and other administrators and staff throughout the district. And we examined how we could possibly apply this to our setting. When I had spoken with the board last week, at this time, we were trying to figure out a way to apply some sort of mathematics to this to sort of come up with an objective measure rather than just trying to go off of someone's opinion about how this should operate, okay? And so I had that numerical value assigned. When we had left that night and exploring some more options, talking with some other individuals, and even talking actually with the high school math department, what we had looked at then was instead of a mathematical process for doing this, we would try to take those 3 criteria that in working with the Harvey County Health Department, they said were probably the most important: the attendance, the 2-week % positive case rate, and then the trend in the county incidence rate. Okay, and what we did was, in talking with especially the math people about the probability piece, instead of trying to assign a weighted numerical average, was to actually look at all the possible combinations that we could come up with, to then just have a conversation about if we have these color values, this could be our mode of operation as it relates to what you see up here. And I've given color copies of the board, of each one of these to the Board of Education. It's also on board docs, so you have access to that. After we
finished that meeting, and that would have been, was it last, the days are running together. It was last Friday, I think, last Thursday or Friday. After we had finished that meeting, or maybe it was Wednesday, Tuesday, that was Tuesday actually, pardon me. The days, like I said, are running together. Some of the input that I got from some individuals, and they're accurate, when you look at the gating criteria itself, and when you think about, and that's on the second page for the board members there, when you think about the community gating criteria and you look at the different colors in terms of yellow versus orange, and that trend in county incidence rate, what we did was essentially establish the same weight for two different colors. All right, so from that mathematical perspective and all those wonderful probabilities that you guys said you never wanted to learn in high school to apply in real life, okay, it just didn't make sense, when we put that on paper. And I think I've had a couple of you reach out to me and say that, and I hope that's what some of you were meaning as it related to that. So, you can go with what we had originally, as a committee, decided to go with in terms of determining what our mode of operation was going to be, or you could look at actually applying that mathematically in terms of the actual possible color combinations that it could produce. Okay, so what I put on our agenda is we have essentially 5 questions that we need to answer to tonight. Who makes the decision as to what mode of operation? Is it going to be a committee? Is it going to be like what we had come up with here, when we had a committee decision where the decision wasn't as what we consider to be more clear-cut based upon our conversations? Or is it going to be the actual board doing that? What criteria is going to be used to make the decision? Is it going to be just the gating criteria, or do we also look at other factors outside of that gating criteria? And what would that be if we did that? There are some that are not on there that might be important, like the number of cases, active cases in the county at that time. Okay? How do we make that decision, or when do we make it? Should it be, I had originally said on the Wednesday for the next week when we had met in that committee, we decided we should do it on the Monday. That gives parents a whole week. Essentially, we would probably make that decision Monday evening. It might come out as late as Tuesday morning, depending upon when the data was relevant, and we could make that decision. But that gives them more time. So we had decided we would look at that. Should it be a 1 week or a 2 week cycle? Okay, the fourth one deals with what Ms. Hedrick was talking about in terms of the educational offerings that we can logistically offer. And I want to point this out because I think this is an important thing to remember. When we got this criteria from the State Department of Education, this was the first time there was a distinction in terms of some students being in hybrid and some students not, especially in that yellow category. That was never anything that came out from any source that we had ever seen prior to that release. What was it, June or August the 16th or whatever that date was? Okay, so I want to make clear that there was never an effort to deceive anyone in any way, shape, or form. It's just like anything else that we've dealt with through this whole process. When we get new information, we make adjustments based upon that new information. And we're trying to work and be as transparent as we possibly can with everyone to the level that we can. I almost think sometimes that transparency can bite you too, because you share something and it becomes gospel. And really, I really want to reinforce that we're really working hard to try to involve as many people as we possibly can. Now, when we look at this modified onsite, in talking with my principals a week ago, after we got to this point, we really cannot do a modified onsite for those elementary kids where we can ensure there's going to be less than 15 kids in a class, and also that social distancing in that K-6. So that's a consideration that we have to discuss tonight as a Board of Education, as a superintendent. We really, logistically, we can't do it with our teaching staff, okay? We could potentially do it using aides, which aides would be supervising parts of classes during the course of a day and flip-flopping back and forth. But when we start looking at, if we have cases of staff members that go down, there's no way that we can continue. And really, logistically, if you have one person gone in the building, that whole domino falls apart. So when I look at the difference between green and yellow as it relates to actually having a modified onsite, If we were to follow the guidance, we would have to make the determination tonight with that pre-K through 6, do we stay full 100% in-person attendance in that yellow? Or do we go hybrid like that secondary level? So that's a decision that really needs to be made in here. Because I'm not recommending that we would go modified on-site with that level. Because we can't socially distance, I'm recommending if we are going to be in session, that it has to be for those elementary kids in yellow, just like it is in green, and the only difference is at that high school. Now, I know some folks aren't going to agree with me on that, and this goes back a little bit to finding that balance between the safety side associated with COVID and the safety side associated with some of the other things we talked about, being that mental health side of kids and that custodial care. And I know some folks too don't agree about the custodial care piece, and I understand that perspective, but that's a reality for some of our young families. So 712 seems fairly solid in terms of how that would operate in a hybrid or remote, or pardon me, in a yellow, orange, or red environment, if we stick with those 4 levels. That seems fairly solid based upon what the research says. The biggest concern that I have, whether we're in green or any mode, frankly, is the safety of our staff. It really is, because of that susceptibility for the adults as opposed to the children in relation to attracting COVID. So the last question is, what mode of operation, or how does the mode of operation affect activities? And I think I put in a note, it's an area we have to have a little more definition, especially when you look to the difference with school activities in yellow and in orange. In this particular iteration, there's not a delineation with the high-risk activities according to the National Federation. And that's something that I'm working with Mr. Becker on. I think we need to include that, what that definition is and what that potentially means for students. Some schools, like, we heard 259, which I think might be the recent part of the students we heard tonight. 259 is shutting down activities for the whole fall, okay? Our recommendation is that we don't do that. Our recommendation is that we look in that yellow, where we would then begin, the biggest difference would be we would limit spectator size in terms of the audience. And then when we get to orange, the biggest difference that we're recommending there is that we would have varsity level competitions only and not junior varsity, because we want to make sure that our older kids have that opportunity to compete, and there would be no spectators at those events. So those are some of the things in terms of what we've been working on over the course of the last week and a half. There have been a lot of iterations of this, and if you look what I showed you before in terms of that process and those colors, if you want to get mathy about this, okay, I put a separate sheet on there. If you only look at this in terms of the 3 potential combinations, rather than 4 with that trend, all right, what you have are 48 potential combinations, and you can count them if you want to. 48 potential combinations, and 30 of those are repeating. Whereas with that other chart, you have a lot more repeaters in there based upon how that worked out. So I'm going to be honest, folks. I don't care which mode that we do. In terms of tonight, how long the meeting would last, it is dependent upon what we decide to do here, frankly. You could do like some other school districts are doing and assign a committee to look at these data every week and make a decision, or however long you want to. You, as a Board of Education, can decide you're going to meet every week and make that determination, or every other week, okay? You can decide to look at what we laid out here for you, what that committee has spent the time doing, and adopt that in terms of making that determination, okay? Or you can have that committee appointed that meets and just looks at all 5 of the criteria and has just a conversation at the time you determine in which you want that decision to be made. And really, we just need to make a decision, and then we need to be flexible if things aren't working out to revisit that decision and that process if there are issues associated with what we're doing. So that's a lot of stuff to throw at you, okay? But trust me, I've been looking at this stuff more than I want to. It's not that I want to stop looking at it. It's just that we've got to make a decision to tell our parents to let us know where we're going. If we were to go today, okay, and we were to look at the data, on the Harvey County Health, using Harvey County Health Department data and our own. This is kind of what it would look like, and I'll try to pull all this stuff up. If we were to look at, let's see, go to the Harvey County site right here. And if we were to look at the trend data, that there's some different ways to look at that. Originally, when I had showed you guys what the Harvey County Health Department said we should calculate that, you essentially look at the data, and you would pull back, you count how many days on the first day, the 14th day, and then the next 2 weeks in terms of that. Subtract the values, see what the difference is, and then if you're up, down, or steady, that gets you your positive, your negative, or your steady value. Okay? I'm not sure I like that as much, because you're looking at a 4-week period when you compare the data points. You only look at 4 specific data points. But if we were to use that math, and I've gone through that before with you, if you want me to do it again, I can. But if you were to use that math, overall the trend would be down. Because we have between 8/24 and 8/11, there were 211 positive cases, okay? On 8/11, there are 275. On 8/24, that's a difference of 64. The next 2 weeks down, you had 210 and 143, that's 67. So you had the 64 was your most recent value, the 67 was your other value, so the trend would be down. I'm not sure that's when we could use that data point, or we could also go to, if we wanted to, we could actually plot the data. And you guys that love the math part of stuff, you could plot the number of cases over the most recent 14 days and look at the actual slope of that line. And you can assign the numerical value of that. You remember that y is equal to mx plus b stuff, right? From back in the old days, where the n is the slope of your line. And then those that have an issue with respect to the slope of that line, how much it goes up or how much it goes down, you could then determine an actual cutoff point for that slope. You're going to rise overrun stuff, right? So this is the practical application of the math side that we all love so much. Or, if you wanted to, you could also go to the Kansas State Department of Health and Environment website. They've got a pretty nice website. It's a little hard to navigate. But when you look at COVID cases in Kansas, you can actually pull up the trend for the county in terms of, oh, it's not going to go where I want it to. That's great. Okay, so we're going to go to Kansas reopen metrics. We're going to look at disease spread, and we'll take Harvey County. And you can see a similar line in Harvey County. And notice that slope of that line. The problem with that line is when you see August 18th is the most current data that they have. So it's about a week old. It's about a week old, but it does give you a trend. If you're doing that on a weekly basis, or you could use all 3 of those to determine what your trend is based upon how all of those look and have that conversation, that committee has that conversation. I said, it doesn't matter to me what we do. We just have to decide and we have to do it. Okay? When you look at the second value, as it relates to that, the percent positive, at the time of this poll, the percent positive was 12.4. I hope it's still 12.4 because that was earlier this afternoon. Now, sometimes that data does change. So 12.4%, when you look at the 12.4% as it relates to our criteria that was selected by the committee, that would put us in orange. Okay? We don't have student attendance data, but we have staff attendance data. With our staff attendance data, right now, our staff attendance shows us still in what would be green. What would be green. And I think we need to do some things with that to make sure that we're looking at the right level of staff, because I'm really worried about instructional staff and instructional support staff. Not that I don't care about those other departments, but the instructional staff and instructional support staff are going to run into the biggest bind if we have a grade level group or 10 teachers in a building that are quarantined or other situations like that. Right? So, if you wanted to use those other 2 criteria, the 2-week cumulative incident rate per 100,000, you have to pull those. So the 2-week cases, as I just showed you guys earlier, we had 64. There's about 34,000 in terms of population. So when you extrapolate that up to 100,000, that's about 188. When you look at what the gating criteria says about that, that puts us in the red. That puts us in the red when you look at that greater than or equal to 151 new cases. If you wanted to look at hospital capacity, there's two places you can look for that data. Once again, the Harford County Health Department has that, and then you could go to the KDHE site. I don't care for the KDHE site because on that particular instance, because that's more of a hassle to look at. But we look at regional hospital capacity on their dashboard, which makes more sense to me, and that's in green. So you can have those 5 different values in which to have the conversation. You could use the three values that we talked about as a committee. And then if there are issues associated with those, we have an additional conversation. Okay? I'm game for anything. We just need to move forward. So that's a lot of stuff to throw at you. That's a lot of stuff that our committee worked on for, I don't know, Angela and Mallory and Jennifer, how many hours? And then plus the hours outside of that. So,
And with these 2 pieces of criteria at the bottom, with the 2-week cumulative incident rate and the hospital capacity, I believe in our first meeting when we were involved with the health department, they said that these were 2 areas that aren't necessarily not important, but probably not at the top of our list of what we need to consider because it does inflate the numbers to a certain extent. To where they recommended that we stick with these top 3 that our committee did choose and for valid reasons. So just personally for that little piece, I would like to stick with kind of the 3 that we're at, that we kind of agreed upon so far, and look at those numbers.
Yeah, I would agree with that, we've talked about this a lot, and I feel pretty comfortable just using the 3 that we've already discussed. I feel like that covers our community pretty well.
I think if you were to have an issue in terms of what those 3 mean, you could take those other 2 criteria. And you might also look at the actual active case rate too, just for that discussion piece too. I think I'm with you 100%.
I think we need more clarification on, or need to decide exactly how we're going to evaluate trend.
Yes.
And you gave us those options. For me, I think one of the biggest issues is that stable is yellow and orange. So which one do we give it? Stable and decreasing, so right now it's stable and decreasing is what I would consider it. So that would be yellow, but is that how everyone else is going to determine that? If it's stable and slightly up, is that an orange, stable and increasing? I mean, we gotta have something that's actually put to it. Because you can't just say, oh, well, that's stable. Well, then which is it, yellow or orange?
Yeah, and that's why when you look at that crazy set of numbers that I showed you guys, that put it using only the 3, or using the 3, sorry, wrong one. Using the 3 different ones, with the D being a decrease. But there's so many more combinations, we would have to have another hour-long conversation really to determine what does this mean, and when do we go to a committee to make a decision. And I'm fine with that. I really am. It doesn't, like I said, it doesn't matter to me. I just want to. We just need to be able to move forward with whatever. This is more representative of that issue that you talked about. I think, Luke, when you had emailed me, that was kind of what I believe what you were referring to. Is that accurate?
There's very little difference between red and green when we talk about increase or decrease. So right now,
2 cases.
right now we're down 3, but what if we're up 1? You know, that's very little difference, but we just went from green to red, which could totally change our mode of operation, and it might not rightfully do so. Like for instance, we could be green on our attendance, and we could be green on our % positive, but if we increase the cases by 1, well, that's a red. And so now we're going to be overall in a yellow mode of operation. And do we really need to have 7 through 12 hybrid in that scenario? Well, if there's 1 case and we increase to 2, that's still red, according to this. So I would love to see there be, let's use that yellow and orange, and let's put some numbers to it. Let's say if we increased by less than 10, you know, that would be orange, but if we increased by more than 10, that would be red. And then maybe the other way around. If we decreased by, which the only problem is, you get to a certain point where if you say we decreased by less than 10 or more than 10, well, what if you didn't even have 10 cases to begin with? So if you do add numbers in that way, you have to bring active cases into the conversation. And where do those numbers come from? Well, we could make some, but they would probably be arbitrary numbers that we just agreed on. And that might be a longer conversation than,
Yeah, I would say if we're not just gonna stick with one, plus or minus one is an increase or a decrease, and I do think it's kind of not very helpful that stable is in two colors. I didn't really think of that before, but I think we should assign number of cases to what is an increase or decrease. I think it would be plus or minus percentage changes. I don't know if we really want to spend the time hashing that out. Maybe if there's a public health professional or a pediatrician or something that would like to say, would help us say if it's 5% up, that's stable orange. If it's 5% down, that's stable yellow, and then plus or minus that is green or red.
the problem with that is if you're at 2 cases and you increase by 2 cases, that's a 100% increase, which will look red. If you just said a percentage, that's gonna look red.
Yeah,
But adding 2 cases to the county is not gonna be.
yeah, but if you don't assign percentages to it, then anyone can say, well, it's only 4 cases, it's only 11 cases, it's only 15 cases. Like, it's all up for interpretation, and I don't want it to be that way. I want it to be very strictly based on math.
So I actually spoke with Lynette Reddington today, and she said that the health department does have a plan to add on to their dashboard, I forget exactly what they call it, a trend incident rate on the dashboard, that would calculate stable, increasing, or decreasing. She said that, and obviously ask her about this as they're working on it, but my understanding is that they would do what you mentioned with the previous 2 weeks and 2 weeks, where it would end up being 28 days that they would look at and go back and look at that. But we did talk about the increase of 1 and decrease of 1, and she kind of said, yeah, you'd need to have a bit of a window. I don't know exactly what that number would be, but Angela, I'm a numbers girl. I like to have concrete information for sure, but I think with all of this, there comes a time when there has to be some flexibility. Like Luke's saying, it'd be great if we're down to 2 cases. I would love that day. 2 cases versus 200 cases is significantly different if we've got a 1 case increase from either of those. So I understand the want for specific numbers, but unfortunately, we don't get that with every piece that we're working through right now.
If we calculate it, we get it.
So if we have 2 cases and a 1 increase, that would be the same value and concern as 200 cases and 1 more increase?
Yeah.
That would be the level of concern that would raise in the community.
I mean, if we're,
200 to 201 versus going.
So that would warrant pulling hundreds of kids from school for a 1 increase. If we have
I see what
200
you're
and 1
doing,
increase.
using like 2 very extreme examples. I
Sure.
mean, but like I personally feel like we can't decide how many cases is enough and how many cases is not enough. Like, I would like to leave it to math.
But at some point, that is our job to determine.
But
I mean, we are advocating.
The first thing, I guess, I want to kind of go through Fred's list here. The first thing we need to do is, who's going to decide which mode of operation we're going to do? Maybe we're going to do it ourselves, and that's really kind of the key choice.
I think we need to do it ourselves. That's what we're elected to do.
So you think each week or every other week we should be?
We haven't got to there. I would be fine with every 2 weeks. I mean, we have a board meeting almost every 2 weeks at this point, and if we have to throw in a few special meetings here and there, I'm fine with that. And I think it gives parents a little bit of buffering to do 2 weeks, but I'm not 100% on that. I think we go either way.
In my mind, a committee would put the work on who? On more people that have a lot of work already. In my mind's eye, I would like to absorb as much of that as we could. And the decisions will probably be hard sometimes. And so I think it's our responsibility to take that on, just from my perspective.
I agree. I think it's a board decision. It should be up to us.
I'm fine with that. I just want to make sure that people know that for the most part, you be able to follow along with what we did and why. But if there are cases like the hypothetical that I just mentioned, then, it does take somebody sitting to look at the data and say, is that an actual threat? Or is that an increase of 1 or 2 cases? And so, yeah, the board is looking at that together, I think.
And the nice thing about it is when it's not in a committee, it's done by the board, it's done in the public can see us work through the process. There has to be some level of flexibility as you look at the numbers, because just different things can throw you off. You just don't know what anomalies might come up.
And I think we have to look at this document, even as we approve it and approve it and approve it again, it's gonna be a living, changing document, because this is novel. I know we've said that like a million times, but it is, and things have changed so much since March, since May, since June, and even throughout August. We've been thrown all this different information and guidance, so we have to understand that, we may be following these guidelines, but as things dwindle down, or we may have a huge spike, we may have to readjust how we're evaluating these things. But we have to start somewhere. So.
The one thing I will say, though, is the numbers, math does need to inform your decision.
Correct.
And I want to, incorporate as much of that as possible so that it doesn't look like arbitrary decisions are being made. And I agree with what you're saying. I interrupted you.
No, it's okay. Since we went down the line and stopped at Luke, I don't think that the Board of Education should be making this decision every week or every 2 weeks. When we went through the committee, it seemed very much like we were going to set up that criteria, and Fred would look every week and line up where the data matches on the grid, and that would be the outcome. I don't think it needs to be an 8-person decision every couple of weeks where we are all throwing in our kind of anecdotal information into the decision. I really think it just needs to be left to the data.
So who gets on that committee, what does that look like?
I said nothing about a committee. I said Fred would look at the data every week, or every 2 weeks, or whatever it is, based on the gating criteria that we set, and everything. And we'd easily also be able to calculate it too. Like, anyone should be able to go to the Harvey County Health Department's website, knowing how to do this on the criteria, and be able to say, okay, yeah, we're going to be in green this week. I don't think it should be something that we talk about every week or 2 weeks.
Okay, so
And inject our feelings into the decision.
you jumped over me in order, which is fine because I talked about anyway. But no, it's absolutely fine. I wanted to hear everybody else first. I spent more hours watching Wichita's board meetings this last week and a half than I've spent in our own, which has been great and maddening at the same time. They did form a committee that is going to be looking at certain criteria that will come back with a recommendation, but they were very clear when they said no committee makes a decision. The ones who make the decisions are the elected board members. And no matter how this goes, good, bad, or indifferent, the 7 of us are responsible for these decisions in this district. We know that coming into it, that we're gonna take the fall at times. And I think we didn't expect to do this through a pandemic, any of us, but this is where we're at. This is the position we hold. So if I'm gonna take the fall for it, that's fine, but I think our board needs to make the decision because we are responsible for this. And like Matt said, if we do this as a board, following criteria, it would not just be some random decision based on feelings. It does take place in public. It's visible for people to see hear the conversation, and I think that's one of the most important things for our community is not just the decision, but how did we get to that decision? What did we consider? And that is what builds trust and understanding. So I do feel like the board needs to be making this decision based on criteria, not going rogue on anyone.
Well, and that goes back to the surveys that were done, back to the bond days about being transparent and communicating. And so we have that discussion in the boardroom and talk in public and talk about where we're at, and then we make the decision. I think it needs to be visible to our families and community of what we're looking at each time.
For the most part, I think, again, people will be able to just look at this criteria and know where we're at and know what's most likely to happen. So I don't think it's going to be a long, drawn-out discussion. I don't think there's going to be a lot of feelings put into it. I think it'll be pretty objective, like, this is what this criteria says, this is what this criteria says. And this third one, whether we're increasing or decreasing, we can evaluate if that is a significant or insignificant factor. And maybe it doesn't even come into play if the other two criteria are lining up.
I mean, again, we're elected officials, and these are major choices, changing their mode of instruction, and we need to be held accountable for changing kids, good or bad, or however people perceive our decisions. But these major choices do rest on our shoulders, in my opinion.
And we will upset people either way, no matter what our decision is. But when those people are upset, I want them to take it out on us. Don't take it out on your administrator. Don't take it out on your teachers. Don't take it out on your superintendent. We're in this position. We can handle it. So we're going to make people mad either way. Unfortunately, I wish we weren't in this position, but we are. So I think if we're going to be accountable, then we need to make the decision.
So, I mean, I think the consensus is that we'll go ahead and make the call. We just need to know whether it's either weekly or bi-weekly.
Yep. And then what criteria? 3 criteria, I think, and then if you're on a budget form, you look at the other 2.
That would, that'd be my preference.
I think you present all the data to us, and our primary criteria will be the 3, and if it happens to be some odd situation that we need to reference our other data points, that we do.
Okay.
So we talk about weekly or bi-weekly, is that what you're
Right, that's the question.
Okay, so in my 2 cents,
It's not clear about it.
Honestly,
Okay.
it does not matter. It does not matter.
I know it would make
Just
it
make a
easier
decision if you got
for
to
us
make
to
it.
do bi-weekly. I know that would be easier, but I think with the level of fear that I feel from some of our community that is gonna be waiting for this information and wanting us to be on top of it, it might be nice to do it weekly, as inconvenient as it can be for us. Because it's inconvenient, this is inconveniencing a lot of other people. Unfortunately, we're in the middle of this and we gotta box ourselves out of here and make people feel safe. So I would err on the side of caution. So my 2 cents would be, is do it weekly. Because we talked about, I think in our last meeting, you doing something every Friday to get information out to us. So if we need to be in line with you somehow to get that information to you, to the community, I think we can set that system up pretty easily around what you're doing.
So you want it to go out on Monday?
Monday or Tuesday morning. I say Monday, but I say for sure by Tuesday morning.
So if we did it, if we got Monday evening,
Sure.
is that?
So I'm just going to give some clarification, because we talked about this in the committee, and it's not an inconvenience, in my opinion, for the board to make a decision every week. It's more of a convenience for parents. If their younger child is in hybrid or remote, that they know that for the next 2 weeks, I need to find someone to provide custodial. Instead of, well, week by week it changes. It allows for just slightly more stability for their childcare situation.
And here's another thing to think about as it relates to that. We may have to change that based upon what we see when we adopt that cycle. If there was something that took place within that 2-week time frame, we may have to call and make a different decision. I mean, seriously. And it may be because I've got 30 staff that are out, and we can't support learning.
What is your gut tell you, Brad, on this deal?
My gut's full, I have no gut. I'm going to be real serious.
Yeah,
I mean, honestly, I'm okay with starting out every other week with the parachute reserve that we can revisit that if there's an issue. I'd like for us to make a decision tonight, what mode we're going to be in the first 2 days of school and that week following Labor Day week, just so parents can plan for that. And once again, if we, at the end of next week, feel like things are really going terrible in a negative direction, then I'd say we revisit that.
You want to go down like that?
We're kind of supposed to say, I think that we should look at it weekly, because looking at the most recent data and most current data will help you make a more accurate decision for the community in regards to public health. So I would advocate for it to be a weekly decision.
Can I just propose something real quick? If we were gonna do it weekly as a board, we not have like a Zoom meeting and have that be public, so that we didn't all have to physically be here every single week. just an idea.
What else do you have to do?
I mean.
We have a numbers. Hey,
Yeah.
I only have one child, I don't have six, so it's easy for
So,
me.
6 kids, that's a little bit of a factor, but, especially if we're gonna meet for 5 minutes, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
Agreed. That's fine.
Sounds like somebody should have other meetings instead of at home.
yeah, probably would.
Would you see it as a problem for making, and so this is maybe more to you, would you see a problem making that decision now for that?
Oh, no, I mean, the 2 days and then the next week, I don't think we can make a decision for 2 days and then another decision for the following
rather
week.
not.
Like, that's acceptable, but I think we should, I personally think we should make it weekly, just so we are capturing any trends, good or bad.
What do you think? Weekly or monthly?
I'm fine with you.
Okay.
That's fine.
Weekly?
Yeah.
Okay. Weekly's fine.
I could go either way, weekly's fine.
My preference would have been 2 weeks, but I'm not set on that, so if
I
the
think
board wants
Angela's,
weekly.
I think Angela's got a good point. We want to kind of use the latest data and
That's fine, I can agree on that.
weekly. So weekly then.
Okay, perfect. Somebody write that down, I hope.
Tony?
And we want to do this, and we'll do it on Monday, right?
Yes,
Okay. And the criteria that we're going to use?
we use those 3, and then we go to the others if there's an issue.
So you'll always have all of the data ready, but hopefully we can just look at 3.
I will have, I will do my math. The next one is the educational offerings logistically. I think I mentioned earlier that the issues we're having with trying to have that modified on-site for elementary is different.
Is it a staffing and
It
a
is.
space issue, or is it just a staffing?
It's more of a space issue and staffing than space issue, especially in Santa Fe. There just isn't enough space. But it is a staffing issue too. And some of the feedback that I've gotten, Angela, as the word has gone out that we're exploring this, is that, look, I want my kid to be in front of a teacher all day, not half the day, potentially in front of an aide, which I don't disagree with. But our goal in that case was to get those groups 15 or less in those settings. We just can't logistically do it. We just can't.
Kurt, can I backtrack you a little bit? Because on the criteria, one thing I wasn't sure about still was how we were calculating attendance, what time period we were going to use.
We would use, well, in this case, we would use the week for students.
Right, I
But
know we're
you-
going to do staffing to start with, but once we get into this, are we going to use that last week's average attendance or the last 2 weeks' average attendance?
Probably go 2 weeks to give us a little bit more data in there.
Okay.
So that wouldn't be any good for 2 weeks out. You know what I'm
Right.
saying?
Right, yeah. Okay, I just wanted to make sure I understood that.
Yeah. That's kind of, that'll be an interesting one to see what happens.
All right.
Because we won't determine whether it's a COVID-related illness or another illness, or it could be that the kid was skipping school too, but they're just absent.
Oh, that doesn't happen.
No, it's just that, ADA, that value that we will use to compare is just the average daily attendance, so it doesn't the language.
Wait, are we coming back to criteria, because we were talking about, so then maybe we should,
I pulled it back because I just wanted to
No,
clarify.
we didn't really finish talking about the criteria, because then you had us go down the list. So we were talking about, the trends being stable, and what we were gonna do about that. I don't feel like we really came to a decision on that.
Angela, if I presented the 3 trend values
Uh-huh.
each time, that might give you a little bit of an idea of what it looks like, across those 3 different values. Does that make any sense? Probably not.
No, I see what you said. You're talking about looking at the Harvey County
Yeah.
website where we take the 3 data points and then the 2 different charts that you showed us?
Yeah. Because the Harvey County data is just going to be like everybody else, and it's going to be as good as what we currently have. I know on that one nice little slope line with the Y is equal to MX plus B that somebody's doing that locally, and I feel pretty good because they're taking that data off the site. I feel pretty good that trend line will be pretty accurate. So I'd say use the 3 to look at to start with, and then you can have that conversation about, okay, what is an appropriate slope of a line or an appropriate number? as we kind of get into that.
See, that's what I'm talking about, like things that are up for interpretation that I'm not very comfortable with. How much of a slope is stable yellow versus stable orange to all of us? Like, it's gonna be up for us to decide. That makes me uncomfortable. But if I misunderstood, I thought we were coming back to that topic, so if that was the decision on that, then, okay, moving on.
Well, the other match is the forward that curve, right? Or the uptick or downtick, shouldn't the other match?
The other two places, yeah, I mean, you should be able to get, some reinforcement one way or the other.
Right.
But I kind of agree with Luke in terms of, it really does come, that slope of that line, if it's like this, that's a lot different than like this, in terms of an increase. And so, if it were like this, I think that's when we meet weekly, or would have to be in advance of that or more often to talk about what we can do.
So as far as, did you want to, because we really, realistically, we can't do the modified on itself.
We cannot.
Did you want us to, you want input from us, whether or not we just wanted to make that on-site or hybrid?
That's what I want. I mean, my recommendation, would be to stay on site.
Right.
With those elementary kids, K through 6. And once again, it goes back to the two things that I talked about earlier, in terms of the safety associated with the virus-related incident and the other side of it. So, but that's, once again, I think the decision that you guys, I can just tell you my staff can't do it, but they just can't. I mean, this will maybe relieve some of their anxiety too a little bit, because they've been just working tirelessly to try to figure out a way to do that, and we just can't. So if you go hybrid, everybody hybrid in yellow, or if you do the on-site in yellow with the pre-K through 6 and the hybrid, that's a decision I think you guys need to make.
Do we just want to go down the line again?
I would go for on-site pre-K through 6.
Inside.
I would go on-site, and Fred, we've talked a lot about this in our meetings and in private, but I found a lot of things interesting. Last week when two pediatricians were talking to Wichita schools during their work session before their meeting, Dr. Reddy, a pediatrician in Wichita, they were actually talking about everything, but discussing the difference between separating pre-K, I think it's 5th grade in Wichita, but the younger kids from the older kids. And the board questioned her a lot on that, and she said that this different piece between the youngers and the olders actually has a lot of medical backing behind it. And they questioned her just to make sure that they understood, and she said, yes, it's not just an academic piece. There is a lot of medical evidence showing that these younger kids definitely need to be in a building, if at all possible, when it's safe, within reason, obviously, but that it's not just personal opinions, that there's actually a lot medically backing that up as to why that's so important. So I'm for on-site.
I've heard both sides, and I've gotten emails on some stuff, but for the information I have been watching that same deal, stay on site.
Yeah, I'm on site after I watched that same meeting and talked to local pediatricians, and I think it's pretty much the same with the medical field that on site would be best for that group.
I would also say on-site, and as far as medical backing, I know that 10 and under, there's evidence that they're spreading it less as opposed to over the age of 10. And honestly, when I look at the criteria, and I said this, was that last week, or last meeting, I feel like we could be on-site for all of them, but we've already made this distinction, and that's not my hill to die on. So I'm fine with pre-K through 6 being on-site instead of going hybrid in yellow.
Yeah, so I would prefer yellow for pre-K through 6, correct?
Yes.
To be hybrid, because we cannot meet that class size of 15 kids, and I worry about the risk of that. It was recommended that in yellow, You can do on-site if you can keep the class size down, and you can't. So I think that's going against the guidance that a lot of pediatricians across the state put out for us.
Okay, so you have a
Yeah, I think so. One thing I want to make clear too about this, just because it was a point of the conversation, we also looked at trying to provide 5th and 6th grade parents, because I had some input on that level with some sort of a hybrid, because they wanted to make that choice. And once again, it goes back to, I really don't have the staff to be able to provide that hybrid at the same time as they're providing the regular full in person. And we explored that pretty extensively too. And so, I wish I could just generate more people and more hours in the day, but we're already taxing our people pretty heavily. And I feel bad on the one hand, but we would also just do a really poor job if we tried to do that on the other. So I know some parents have reached out to me and said that they may make that decision, or they would just go all remote in, and if they make that decision, that's okay. That's okay. It's not that we want that to happen, but you as the parent are responsible for your child. And if you've got that support structure at home, I mean, we're not going to stand in your way, obviously, to do that, no matter what decision you made up to this point. So I just wanted to reinforce that.
So if somebody wants to, because really tonight is the first time that we're going to finalize this.
It is.
This is really the first time people really know what's going to happen.
It is.
And so if people want to change, to go from the on-site hybrid, whatever that you've been on the cover, they want to go remote now because they don't feel comfortable. That's okay, right?
It is, and I hope we don't have 150 people doing that, because we've got K through 6, 4 remote teachers, or 14, pardon, remote teachers, 14, correct? 14 remote teachers, and so we would have to look at getting more remote teachers if that were to happen, if we had a whole rush. But and my principals and I at that level talked about that today. We'll just deal with what we have to deal with. We made a lot of changes in the last 6 weeks.
At one point, through the initial instructional and operations meetings at the high school, there was a conversation about that there would be the opportunity, if you had chosen the flexible option or the on-site, at that point is what we called it, that you could move at some point if you no longer felt comfortable in the building to remote, but it didn't work the other direction.
Well,
you could go from remote and then decide later you wanted to be on-site.
With administrative permission is how we work.
Right.
Either way. Because once again, we've got the sections and stuff, they're building those class lists. We built those remote teachers around those requests. So once
they'll be
again,
case by case.
they would have to reach out to the principals, in this situation, going from on-site to remote at those grade levels, especially 5 and 6, because that's where the majority of the concerns were. I don't think we would have a lot of pushback in that regard. If there was, we will deal with that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I talked to my principal about that, but we're all going, we hope 200 don't decide to do that, only because of the way we have stuff set up now. But we'll just deal with what we have to do. It's just what it is.
Well, I think the point is that they're still getting to choose, correct?
They are, yes, they are, yeah. And once again, though, I'm going to temper that with saying, if we have 400 more do that, then we'll have to go back and revisit our sections and stuff. So I'm just being cautious about that. I'm trying to hedge my bets on both sides of this fence.
And this leads me to a question that you and I talked about. I don't know if you were able to pull the numbers, but so do we have enough teachers to do the remote homework?
We do now with the numbers that we have now. We feel fairly comfortable. Yes. But if we had, like I said, 200 more across like the 2 grade levels in at 5th and 6th, we would have to pull several more teachers, 3 at least, maybe 4 more, or more.
So what happens if we're all remote? What if we're red?
Well, but then everybody's in remote, even our teachers. You know what I mean?
And they would just be with their own
Yes.
class.
Well, I just want to make sure, I don't think we ever had a conversation about that, but
So if we
just to
have,
clarify.
I'm sorry, if we have a few families that after seeing this tonight are not comfortable being full on-site pre-K-6, they should contact their building administrator and have that conversation with
Yes.
them. No guarantees, but have the conversation and see what accommodations needed.
So they're not locked in. If they're very scared and have some very valid reasons, they can reach out and have a conversation. Okay.
How much capacity do you say you have there? I mean, like, I guess like probably each grade I'm sure is different, but do you feel like we're close to capacity with the number of remote teachers we have right now?
It's really not the capacity part of it. We're going into day 13 of professional learning tomorrow, and as I look at a few of the teachers back there, they're trying to wrap up what they believe the mode they're going to be in for their class and their students. And so as much as he's been saying that we're going to have administrators work through it, I can see an extreme amount of anxiety for teachers if we go to them and say, we need 6 more teachers to do remote only, for example, because you're not going to be doing on-site anymore. And that sounds like an excuse, but it's just a reality in what they've been working on. And like he said, if that's what we got to do, that's what we got to do. But then part of me is a little bit nervous. And again, if we got to do it, we got to do it. But it's like we need a week in between the week because there's some other things that they need to be doing and working on that. And then on the backpack side of it, we're just about done finalizing which kids are with which teacher and class list. And teachers are waiting on software that we were purchasing for this school year we've never had. And we've got to have that set up in Infinite Campus before it can sync with all the others. So our IT folks are just going to have to undo what they've almost gotten done. Again, it's not impossible. It's just that we're going to be running out of time. So the sooner we can know what families want to do, we'll do the best we can do to make that happen because like all of us, we want everyone to feel comfortable with it, what they're going to be doing. But just to understand that you might get a nervous reply on the other end when those requests are coming in. And just that there's several other things that would have to be done to make it happen and to be ready by the first day of school.
And I think the best way that we can avoid that situation is by the criteria that we're setting here tonight to reassure the community that the kids are going to be safe. That we're not raising red flags for parents where they think, oh, I don't think this is safe anymore. I'm pulling my kid out to remote. So
I don't think anyone said anything about ditching this plan at all and not kind of using this and going by this as a guide. So I don't know where that would come from.
just the decision about being on-site or hybrid, I think.
Which initially that came out as that was going to be a district decision anyway, as to which one of those it would be in.
Okay, so as far as your questions here, Fred, what educational offering can we logistically offer?
I think we can.
Okay. How does mode of operation affect activities?
Yeah.
And that's the school activities section.
Sorry, can we go back one time?
Sure.
So we said for pre-K 5, we decided, since 6, I keep looking at this, that the consensus was on-site for yellow. Is that also orange? Did we talk about
hybrid orange?
Hybrid orange,
I would
okay.
go hybrid orange.
So on-site, hybrid, remote for the pre-K.
And that's what I will say, that's not uncommon for a lot of schools across because of the same issues that we're facing. And what we're really reemphasize what I tried to say to you tactfully is that I hope we don't have 100 people knocking on our door wanting to make that change. Because if we would, like Sheila's saying, we would have to turn over some apple carts. So.
Isn't, not that it matters what other districts are doing essentially, but isn't Wichita in orange their pre-K-5 on-site?
I believe that's correct. But I'm not sure in orange if it is.
I think it is because they decided they're in orange to kick off the year.
And I did not listen to the board meeting. I have enough board meetings that I have to go to.
Totally understand.
So I refuse to listen to that.
I think they're in person actually.
I just looked at a lot of different matrices and it looks like a lot of them are in that.
What are their class sizes though?
I don't know what you might think.
that, okay?
Yeah, I just wanted, I wasn't sure what we decided on orange.
Okay. All right, so, the next item was, how does the load affect activities? What do you want from us on that?
Well, I think the biggest thing is we need to work on that, and I talked with Dr. Coops a lot over the weekend, and Ryan Becker's also talked to her quite a bit. The biggest thing is making sure there's clarity, because when you look at this, for example, in this criteria, I'll try to blow it up a little bit. This thing is slower than I am. Or maybe I just don't know how to do it. When you look at, for example, in yellow, on-site, following USD 373 guidelines where applicable, limiting group sizes to the extent possible. I think we might want to just tighten that language up a little bit. And that's something that Brian and I still need to work on. When you look at orange, though, I think we need to make that where it says here competitions or performances can be limited or postponed. I really would like to put in there competitions are limited to varsity level only. Varsity level only. And only because if we're in orange and our kids are fully remote at that secondary level, we still want them to be able to practice, but I'm not sure I want to have a bunch of junior varsity competitions and a bunch of activities like that where we're sending kids out to different places and stuff like that. We're at that point. And that was one of the recommendations in talking with Dr. Koontz that we might want to, especially with the high impact activities or high risk activities, like the football and wrestling and stuff like that. If you limit that to varsity level competitions, at least your junior and senior kids or your varsity level kids still have that opportunity. You still have practices, modified practices, like they have been, okay? And maybe modified a little more in terms of the contact and stuff or the numbers. But I think we need to address this as it relates to that a little bit better. And that's something, seriously, as a result of conversations over the weekend and through the day-to-day, frankly, I haven't had time to address it. That would be the only thing that I would recommend.
And is Brian Becker on par with that as being varsity level only in orange?
Because when we had talked about that earlier, that's one of the things that we had agreed to. And we changed that over the course of like the last couple of days or 4 days or whenever that was, based upon looking at some other plans. But I just think for parents to understand, I wouldn't want a parent to be upset if all of a sudden we say competitions or performances could be limited or postponed. I'd rather be more specific about what kinds of competitions we would allow. That way parents know I'm going to miss that junior varsity game because they're not going to have it, but the varsity game will take place. And I don't know if you guys have any feelings about that or not. So
I do. I have really strong feelings about it. I would say, and you said it yourself, in orange mode, 7 through 12 is remote. They're not around staff. They're only around their fellow teammates and their coaches as far as practices go. So they're not necessarily putting other people at risk. So for me, I would have the orange read the exact same way as green and yellow does. They're not,
in terms of the athletes themselves,
yeah. Competition too. I wouldn't take it away from them. They have a choice. There's nobody being forced to do athletics. They have a choice. They want to do that. They can go to that risk. They can, just like being on-site in school. They have a choice to make that option flexible. Okay? They have a choice whether they want to do sports or not. So, especially when they're not around staff, they're not putting anybody else at risk other than their fellow athletes and coaches. Unless I saw that there was cases, popping up in one of our programs, then I would say, okay, you probably either shut down football practice or golf or whatever it is. There's something going on there, okay? But unless I saw that happening, I would say continue to play, especially considering they're remote learning anyway. They're not taking it into the classroom.
I was going to go with that, what he'd said, and then until you brought that up, but you're right. You make a very good point. They're not going to have contact with anybody else other than the people they're already going to have contact with, because it's going to be coaches and other players on the team. And then, of course, the other team, their county might be in a completely different scenario than we were too. So, yeah, I guess so. That does make sense.
I mean, I agree with Luke on that too. I think it should be the same, and as far as travel, if we're gonna travel, the parents that can take their kids can take their kids, and then that limits the number of the kids on the bus or around the coach or whatever, but, you know, knowing that some parents aren't gonna be able to do that, but many will. So, yeah, I mean, I agree with Luke on that.
Especially if we're doing virtual streaming, I mean, there's very little interaction with these athletes and anybody outside of that sport.
And they've been together all summer in weights and conditioning or summer competition.
Well, and they've had times where they've been interrupted with their training.
Yes, they have.
You know, so I mean,
Well, yeah, we
And we
you know,
can continue to follow those same guidelines.
we
sure.
still
And that's what's in
continue
place
that.
right now. That's the stuff that's in place right now.
Yeah. But I don't think any of the kids had issues with that. It was maybe coaches.
Cool. I mean, you know one thing nice about this, I've got influence with no vote. You know, and that's why when we start talking about this, you're the ones that have to vote on it.
I would say that, not to be cliche, we let them play, and it's at the discretion of, you know, what's the situation, and Brian Becker has done an incredible job handling everything that's popped up throughout the summer, and I have faith that he will continue to handle anything that comes through, so I wouldn't put any restriction on the activities until we're ready.
Well, except for Antoine, we've gone down the line. Luke, I hadn't thought about that point of it until you brought it up either. In talking with Lynette, I did ask her about this, which I think you sent out to us anyway, about how the health department feels about this. And she reiterated again, looking at our plan, they think it's a great plan, they support our plan. So knowing that the health department has taken a look at this and signed off on it, knowing that these 7 through 12 kids aren't going to be in classrooms. And I know it'll be different versus their weights and conditioning and practices right now, but we've had a number of weeks where these kids have gone through this. They're used to wearing masks, they're used to going through these mitigation strategies. Nobody likes it, but they're doing it. So I'm in support of keeping it the way it is. I think we all know that if something comes up, we're going to have to change. That's in every box. And I kind of keep going back to the point of when this started and listening to Dr. Norman, the point was we do our best to mitigate, but we'll never be able to eliminate. And I have to remind myself of that. We do the best we possibly can, knowing that 0 is probably not an option. But I think we have a good plan in place. And in listening with Karen Lehman in our last meeting, when she was asked her thoughts on this, it was nice to hear her response of how Brian Becker has handled this and working through those protocols. And unfortunately, we have had some positives, but I think it's good practice for us to see, are protocols working? Do we need to make adjustments before sports come into play in the school year? So I'm comfortable with the way it is written.
It's kind of busy because I see in your shoes, there's a lot more to worry about because of other things that you're going to have to move around if things break out weird. But Luke brought up some interesting points, and I'm almost not, it's almost, I mean, I don't even know if I should comment on it because I'm so biased towards athletics, and that whole culture for me is everything. So I guess I'll just leave it there, and anything I can do to keep those guys playing and those kiddos on the field. I think we meet weekly. We talk about that. We do the hard things when we have to do them, hoping. The thing for me is it's not a matter of if, it's when. And I've been super impressed with the team and all the work they've put in and to help protect the kiddos and our teachers. I think we'll make those hard decisions as we need to, knowing that people aren't going to be happy with it, but I'd like to just do case-by-case basis. And every week we'll have follow-ups where we can make those decisions. So, yeah, I'm all for keeping them on the field or playing their whatever activities they want to do until we can. So.
And can I just jump in, because like I said, I talk a lot. We did hear a lot from sports tonight, but this includes so much more than sports. This is fine arts, and we fight that battle every year about supporting fine arts and raising them to the level of support that our athletics have. And I think it's very important that we don't just look at this, and I'm not saying we do, but just publicly say we're not just looking at sports. We see the value of sports. There's also so much value with theater and band and orchestra and choir. All of these kids have their thing that they love, that they get up for in the morning. So while a lot of it is focused around sports, this does come into play with a lot of these kiddos who lost out on competitions in the spring and they didn't get to do those things. And those options, they may be able to spread out and do it very well in a new sense. So I don't want to take that away from them either.
When we last committee meeting, I was pretty uncomfortable with the fact that we had deviated so much from the state guidance, especially, basically the state guidance is kind of shutting things down once we get into yellow. But since then, I've kind of come around to allowing some more flexibility, kind of seeing how much the kids have been trying all summer to really show that they can do this. I did like the plan that is printed out, that it kind of has some levels that as things get worse, we kind of scale back and we tighten it up a little bit. So basically, I think your suggestion was to make it green all the way across, or green with yellow?
Not all the way across. I agree with what Jennifer said. At red, we would probably have to look at restricting things. But right now, we already have guidelines in place that if cases pop up in a certain activity, that we would do something to restrict that. So, and that's the case whether we're in green or yellow. So I would just follow the same language in green and yellow. I would do that in orange as well. Not in red. In red, yes, we're gonna have to restrict activity. But
yeah, so like, would you say orange becomes the red, or
no, I would
yellow
say,
becomes the red?
So when we look at green and yellow, that's the exact same words, right? Okay. I would put those exact same words in the orange.
And then what do we put in red?
Red says what red says right now.
And leave it at remote only, or have no?
Before red, there's a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
You know what I mean? I think we'll be catching a lot of stuff before red. Right?
I think, I like the language because it gives a little bit of discretion program to program. Because if if there's a situation that pops up in the football team, that doesn't necessarily affect the girls who play volleyball.
Right. Yeah.
And so by saying, well, we're gonna shut it all down when there's zero happening in their cohort, I just think we have to trust the people who are working directly with these kids and allow them some autonomy.
So then is the consensus to replace what currently is in yellow, what is currently in orange with what's in yellow and green, so just make it one big square?
That's what I would like to do.
And then what is-
Because again,
what's
we're
red?
already, because leave red as the way it is.
Yeah.
Because again, we have a problem in one sport, one cohort, we're already gonna address that whether we're in green or yellow. So, and, I mean, if anything, I guess in orange, maybe you could say we limit group travel. Maybe that's the only thing that we need to add to that.
And I think they would probably be doing that, a lot of that anyways. So the difference, just for my own clarification, the main difference between yellow and orange is group travel being limited in orange, and that competitions or performances could be limited or postponed, and then limiting group sizes to the extent possible. It's just the first two sentences are the same.
So kind of like,
Limiting group sizes. Okay. So, group travel would be limited, and then competitions could be limited or postponed.
Which what that really meant was varsity only, right?
Well,
That's not what it says.
that's what I said we should
I-
probably say first.
But that's what we intended by that sentence that you were saying to clarify it.
And I don't see that as I understand that was brought up, but I'm not seeing that as I read through this. So adding that would be something different.
I'm not opposed to keeping the orange language the same because it says competitions or performances could be limited or postponed. That doesn't mean they have to be. But if we do have an incident come up in a specific sport, we could opt to postpone that when maybe those two teams could meet up again later. It doesn't mean that they absolutely have to. So I don't know that anything in orange is absolutely binding. I could be wrong, so honestly, I think
It's our
so.
intent look vague.
Okay.
And to make, there's definitely clearly different language. So when you come to orange and the first thing you say is practices are allowed, that makes people say, well, what are you trying to say? Like, you're saying as soon as we get here, all competitions are in jeopardy? And so I think that makes our intent very vague. So, and again, in green and yellow, we're already gonna look and say, if this team or activity has a problem, we can look to postpone their activity. Regardless of what color we're in, that's what we're gonna do because that's the safe thing to do, right? So why do we need that difference in language going from orange? I just think it makes it very vague.
Well, and I don't have
doing that all along.
I don't have a problem with competition happening in orange. I didn't read it that way, but I can see where some might infer that.
I would say, across the board, the statement could be made, competitions or performances could be limited or postponed, dependent on individual programs. I mean, because they could. So.
And it could depend on the team.
I don't know if we have to add that language to all of them, but I think that's the expectation, even in green. If we have a situation, we're going to deal with it, and that may mean canceling games. It doesn't mean we're shutting down a season.
Right.
Yeah. You get all this?
Yeah.
I don't think there's a decision.
So,
Okay.
I think we're okay. I mean, I think, but honestly, you just have to remember that the league may have some regulations as it relates to some of the stuff and who you're competing against. So you just have to recognize the fact that some of that, if we're going to some places, might be out of our control in terms of some.
Yeah, I get that.
And I think I read somewhere, I don't remember where, that if there is a competition and we were to travel to another location, if they have more strict guidelines, we follow the more strict guidelines of whichever team it is.
And they're trying to get together as a league and be consistent.
Sure.
They really are.
So then are we leaving orange how it's currently written, or are we?
I said my piece. Everybody else could say, leave it or change it.
Yeah, that's, thank you. Leave it.
I would make it the same as green and yellow.
So change it.
Change it.
Change it. You know? Leave it.
Do we want to add in, leave or change?
No.
I have a question. No, I have a question before I commit.
No, we're not gonna overanalyze it. It's either
That's in my nature.
Okay.
So with do we just want to have the understanding that competitions or performances could be postponed?
I think that's
And-
good.
Yes.
Right?
Okay, so we don't need to worry about that then. I'm fine with doing green and yellow into the orange.
So change.
Yes.
Change. Change it.
Change.
Leave it.
Change it.
I'll change it. Okay. Change it. Okay.
Spectators and audience, you guys okay with that? Honestly, I think the adults are the biggest concern when we start doing that. Oh, I want to back up a little bit. Where it says school activities, where it says remote only. One of the reasons remote only is there is that, like, there are some activities, from what I'm understanding, according to Brian, that are trying to figure out ways to do some remote competitions, like Scholars Bowl and stuff like that. So those would be allowed in that environment. When we look at the criteria for spectators, when we're in orange, or in yellow and orange, that's when things become limited, obviously. And that virtual streaming option only, we could somehow purchase that filming capacity from the Federation for a certain dollar amount that would allow anyone to stream those activities. So maybe something that high school approaches the Lucha Club with and stuff like that, to be able to do that for those high school sports in which those things are filmed. And that wouldn't mean everything, but it would mean probably your major sports. And I'm not sure still locally how much we actually produce locally. I don't think there's that much in terms of like on my YouTube channel or anything like that. What do you think you can actually do?
It'd be a great thing to start. I mean, personally, it stings because there's competitions and performances that I want to watch, but it's not about me. I just want to do everything we can to keep the kids safe and let them do their piece.
Are we okay with those?
I'm fine with that.
I just have a question.
Nope.
When it talks about the limited to 2 participants, or 2 spectators per participant, how is that passed down? I mean, if you've got a family with divorced parents, that makes it a...
Yeah, this is gonna be a fun one to figure out. And we're going to Mr. Beck to figure that one out.
Okay, that sounds good.
And this is one of the things they talked about with respect to the league. This is one of the things that they tried to work through. So I think that they're gonna have to make an adjustment to some of that stuff based upon those things.
Limiting the spectators is perfectly fine. The kids need to be there.
Well, like, for example, this weekend there's a volleyball tournament. It was the league volleyball tournament, and the school couldn't host part of that, so we're hosting like the 5-team part of that this weekend. Right now, we're probably in yellow. We'll find that out when we leave here tonight, or we have that discussion after this is all said and done, which means that would be limited. From what I understand, that's already kind of been put in place for the weekend, knowing what's coming in. So they're already getting their head down.
Anything else on the, I guess, so anything else on the matrix itself?
Do you want to go over visitor access just real quick? It's the...
Yeah, that's the thing that we essentially in operations, that's what we address in operations. It's essentially limited from left to right there. That really didn't change any.
And they're pretty much, it's all the same. It's just limited by appointment.
Yes.
Or outside.
And that's something that we're gonna have to talk about well, it's a safety thing for me. You know, one of the things when I interviewed here that I was really surprised by is we didn't have secure entry into the building. There should be some sort of a buzzing system, in my opinion. A couple grand per entry door, we could get that taken care of. That'd be a capital expenditure, but you know, it would really help during this time, because if we're keeping those front doors locked, somebody's gonna call to have somebody come open the door for them. And I would much rather it be a buzz-in system where you can see who it is, and you know, you'll recognize most of the family, neighborhood people and stuff coming in. So that's something we're gonna come to you guys with pretty quick.
And the last thing.
Real quick, I think it's just a formatting thing, but on visitor access, like the split in the yellow and orange, they're exactly the same. So can we just make that one square?
Well, what Samantha's gonna do, Mrs. Anderson, when she gets done, is she's gonna take and pretty this up, because I've been made fun of several times about, especially like with the process thing and the colors and stuff.
The teal is great and all.
Yeah, I think you made fun of me if I remember.
No.
So
Yeah,
yes,
I like read them all, like, what's the difference?
yeah, well, and it was just put in there when we were going through that.
So I have one last question, and maybe I dreamed this when I was dreaming about the dating criteria, but I feel like at one point we talked about having a column for sped. Maybe not.
No.
But it was.
A row,
Yeah, a row, sorry. Was that like in an operations meeting? Maybe. I want to say it was early on in the conversation, and I don't know that it went anywhere, but dealing with whether some of the higher needs sped kids would be on site even when, especially in the high school, when the rest of the high school was in remote, because of their needs and their IEPs that we have to meet. And I don't know that it needs to be on here, but I think we need to be addressing those so they don't kind of fall through the cracks, because a lot of those kids, remote learning it's just not.
well, and that's then they should do that by IEP. Those requirements should be on there. That is being
Will
addressed.
they be adapting all of the IEPs before?
Well, they're going to have to make a lot of changes. They're adapting, and I'm not sure they want to have actual IEP meetings and rate to talk about more than I can.
That's a heck of a lot of work.
Well, it is, and I know that they've got some guidance. You spent time with the administrators to make sure they understood what that guidance was, and they're directing the teachers down the ball. So that is being addressed. So, but it is not a column or a row.
Right. Okay.
Do you want to make it, I can't tell
I
you
know,
now what your facial expression is. Do you want to make it?
Okay, I can talk, right? That's never been a problem. So the guidance that we have given to the special education teachers is that.
Will you step up here? I can't hear anything you're
Really,
saying. I'm sorry.
I would like to hide in the back.
I know.
The guidance is that, that the teachers are instructed to start with the parents that have requested remote only as their primary source. To contact those parents and decide what services are going to look like during the time for the students that parents selected remote completely. We asked them to complete that task by the end of last week. Also to explain to parents what remote is. You know, what does it look like during this time? And just ensure that that's what they want to do. Then we've asked them to, by the end of, or by family engagement time next week, that they be prepared with paperwork to amend IEPs that talk about what services are going to look like in person, what they're going to look like in a hybrid model, and what they will look like remotely. We have tried to honor parents' requests for those, but we have the legal obligation to respond if a student is not making appropriate progress towards an IEP goal. So we did a lot of training about the need to progress monitor. So if a family has selected remote only, the team has to make sure they're progress monitoring at least weekly or bi-weekly, depending on what the goal is. And then if the child is not making adequate progress towards that goal, the team is required to convene an IEP meeting to talk about their recommendations for instruction. It's still, because it's an option with the district for an all-remote setting, it's still a parent's right to select that for their student, but we have the responsibility to talk to the parent about what we feel is educationally appropriate for the child and the lack of progress that we may or may not be seeing because of the delivery model. So we are trying very much to honor what the parents are requesting and honor what the district is doing, but the direction also is progress monitor for 3 weeks, possibly 6 if it's a math only, because we progress monitor every other week. If progress is not being made, to call an IEP team together to review that and make changes to the plan.
Do you foresee for your 7-12 following moving to hybrid as soon as you're yellow, or will that, can some of your sped classes be an exception to that?
Right, so that'll be made on an individual decision.
Okay.
So the teams have been asked to look at all of those individually for each student and kind of also talking to families about what supports are available at home. And again, we can't, it's kind of like what we went to before, we can offer more, but we can't require more. So if the district's in hybrid and a family says, I only am interested in my child coming in for specific days, we have to spec that, but we can say we have additional services available if it's appropriate for the student, and the parents can choose whether or not to access those services.
Excellent. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Anything else on the matrix?
Motion to approve that.
Can I ask a couple of questions?
Sure.
Where does latchkey fall in the matrix?
Thanks, Angela.
Well, people have been asking, I don't know.
Yeah, I see with latchkey, you know, this goes back to that custodial care piece that we're trying to arrange during the day. It's going to be hard for latchkey. They'll still operate as they have right now. We haven't really touched what latchkey would, how that would change as it relates to that, because that's a little bit different type of a program. The problem is we won't be able to offer that like during hybrid, you know, during the course of the school day, because most of those employees are also aides of ours like parents. Does that answer your question at all?
Not really. I mean, I feel like latchkey employees are a little bit uncertain on what next year's going to look like, so trying to get clarity in when those decisions will be made for them.
Well, my assumption was we were just starting latchkey as normal when school started, like what they had done in the past.
So when we're in red, what does that mean for latchkey?
Well, I think just like this past year when they were closed, when the school buildings were closed, was latchkey not in operation at all? I don't know. I must have.
Initially, it was closed, and then my understanding was we got guidance that that was acceptable because it was considered daycare.
Because it ran all
And the
summer.
governor specifically said that daycares should be open, and that's kind of the umbrella that latchkey functions as. And so it did reopen at some point.
It ran all summer, so my assumption is, and I've not had any conversations with Katie otherwise, that it was going to begin running as it had.
So it wouldn't be impacted by any of this getting break?
I don't see it being impacted. If we're remote, doesn't mean that schools are closed, you know, by an executive order like it was last spring. And that's a local decision too.
Okay. I just wanted clarity on And then another question, we got a letter and I just wanted to ask, are we requiring remote teachers to be physically in the buildings?
Yes, I mean, they're supposed to be in the buildings and arrange with their principals an on-site and an off-site schedule. That was a part of that memorandum of understanding that was agreed to by the teachers union in the district that was ratified at the last board meeting. And we had talked about that at different times, and that question was asked of me, what's the purpose of doing that? There are three reasons for that. The last one is that it was one of the ratified pieces in that MOU. The first one is, if teachers aren't on site, we've got a pretty stable internet connection here. I can't be guaranteed at someone's home that that's going to be a stable internet connection. It's just like during, with our IDB sessions and other sessions, when we would have, from the home, you would have some unstable connections perhaps. At least here, I know that internet connection is going to be stable. Another one of the things, and that was discussed with me by the Board of Education too, was that there were issues with respect to, the resources were in a different place than the teacher was. And we want to make sure if they have to be on site, at least the resources will be there during that on-site time. So,
okay.
Those are the reasons.
I didn't realize it was part of the MOU, which would mean NEA looked at that as well. Right?
Well, that's what we had discussed when we had went over that. So
I just don't remember that specific part, so when someone said that, I was kind of like, I don't understand.
It says within that on-site and off-site hours will be, a schedule will be developed with the building principal. So it gives us some leeway. But yes, on-site, the expectation is that they're on-site. That was an expectation from the board to me in our discussions that I read. And maybe I'm incorrect there, but that was an expectation that was related to me when we were going through some of those processes.
Are they using up a whole classroom as well, or are they, I'm just wondering, if a space is needed and one teacher is just in there, that doesn't seem like the best use of space.
I think it varies, Angela.
Okay.
They're working super hard and trying to make all of this work. So some of them are getting relocated just to make it work.
Okay.
And some of that will depend building by building, the space that they have and the use, so that's kind of at their discretion.
Yeah, they're working together on it.
And we know that some teachers are going to, for example, do some things after hours and stuff like that. Obviously, we wouldn't require that at all to be on site. That's why they have that latitude to work with their building principals on the schedules for on-site and off-site hours.
Okay. So you want to make sure the modification?
I move to approve the gating criteria for return to learn as modified.
Second.
Moving second, any further discussion? All those in favor? Say aye. All right.
Thank you. One quick question. This doesn't have to do with changing the matrix at all, but it does have to do with the hybrid operation. I'm just curious if some parents find that it's super difficult to have kids out of school Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday versus Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. How much flexibility do we have to allow this, for them to say which 2 days they want their kids going to school during the hybrid operation?
Was that a question in one of our surveys? I can't remember. I could have read that as well.
I think there was.
I think there was.
I remember.
I think it was on the survey you did. I hope so. I don't remember what it was.
Okay.
I don't know how relevant it would be at this point, so I feel like we would need to make sure we have that again. There's a tool in Infinite Campus, but we're also trying to get ready of making sure that families having more than one child, that the days would also be the same.
Yeah, I remember that part.
Yeah, but no, we'll make sure that we have that more relevant information than what survey that might have been.
I don't
Well,
remember.
if there are issues,
I don't know.
if there are issues, the recommendation would be to reach out to that building principal. I mean, they're going to work as much as they can with families in that regard. You know what I mean? So it's all the database lining up based upon the families, like she was.
How did we separate them initially? Was that based off of request or was it by last name or something?
they're working through those class systems right now with that process, and they're associating the families first.
Right.
Okay, and then they're trying to balance out class sizes.
Okay.
Then we'll see what kind of a mess that makes in other buildings where families are scattered in terms of how that works if the family members are. So each building is kind of going to be manually manipulating some of that based upon the class section sizes.
Huge thank you to people working on that. I can't imagine the nightmare that is, honestly.
Jody.
That's a ton of work.
Jody is about ready to go on a vacation.
Yeah, live off the grid, just walk
Yeah,
away.
he's really put in a lot of time and had to wait on us for some things. And you know, when I want you all to understand, even the folks at home and the audience too. You know, there's still stuff that we're still working on. We're still working on the parent logs to make sure that we can do that effectively and efficiently and collect that. We're still working on ensuring like the meaningful parent contact stuff, that we have a way to track that and trace that effectively. I mean, there's a million parts that are still hanging out there that we're trying to tie together. So, you know, we could have used probably another week, frankly, to get ready. But we're ready to have kids, and we want to see the kids, and we'll be ready when they get here on the 3rd. There's been a lot of sleepless nights by a lot of staff members, a lot of principals. I can't say that any less strongly that they just worked their tails off and they put a lot of time and effort into this. There's still a lot of moving pieces that we're trying to put together. So what we would have to do now is what are we going to do on the 3rd of September?
So, well, we started that little discussion, but off the top of my head here, as I'm looking through this, it looks like it's yellow, orange, yellow for the first week criteria.
Green. We have green, and we have, it depends on what you want to do with this table. I mean, if you look at it being a decreasing trend from the Harvey County, in terms of the 2 week, that was down. Okay, so that 2 would be a green, or if you wanted to say it was yellow because the other 2 were steady. So, you know, I would probably look at that and say that's probably a steady trend, so a yellow. Okay? So you got green, yellow, and orange, because your percent positive was 12.4.
So Fred, I have a comment with a question mark behind it, because I'm not really sure if it's a comment or a question, but I think it definitely needs to be considered. I am a frequent visitor of the Harvey County dashboard. It's on my phone every day. In looking at these numbers that change even a few times a day sometimes, I understand the reasoning behind that and why. I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed, but I have a little touch of common sense, and I've been looking at with our cluster that has come out August 17th. Looking at those numbers, where there were 46 confirmed cases, but 482 tests taken, with a 9.5% positive rate out there, I'm not seeing the negative tests showing up on our graph. So I've not seen that, so I reached out to Lynette today and I asked her about that. And I wish she could be here tonight. I asked her to come, and she's got some family stuff and she's completely overworked, which I understand. But when I asked about these negative cases in the cluster, and I do want to preface by saying that not all of the positive cases are counted in Harvey County, because some of these cases are outside of the county, so it gets a little murky there. When I asked about what happened to all of these negative cases, she said they're not tracking the negatives. That's not been brought into our numbers on the dashboard. So we're seeing a 12.4% positive 2-week test rate that includes the cluster positives, but does not include any cluster negatives. And when I asked why, because I don't understand that, I was told that the health department didn't actually conduct this test and go through with all of that. It was actually done by Bethel College through Health Ministries. So those two paired together and did that. And that they would likely have the negative percentage, or the negative numbers. So in going back with Lynette, just trying to get some clarification, She sent an email tonight and said, I did some follow-up on the negative results related to the cluster. It will take time to sort. Not sure if it will get done. Soon enough, Bethel data will be past the 2-week % positive rate, which yes, it absolutely will. But it's not in the % positive time frame that we would look at tonight. And I understand that we're going to take those positives, but I have strong concerns with taking these numbers and not including a huge amount of negatives. And we don't know exactly which negatives would come into play and count for Harvey County and other counties, but none of these negatives are being tracked on our dashboard. And so that skews the numbers significantly. Am I wrong?
Oh, I'm not going to disagree with you, but all I'm going to tell you is if we start questioning those numbers, that's where the we have to just rely on them to provide that for us. If it's inaccurate, who is going to validate that?
I'd like to know we're hundreds of negative cases.
I understand that, but gosh, we could chase that dog around the garage all we wanted to, but we're still, that number is what we've been given. And so I would really struggle with saying we wouldn't use that number, or, because I wouldn't know where else to go. I mean, I'm just honest. I wouldn't know what number to use in place of that. And that's why I think when Angela was talking about some of that using the math piece, we just have to use those numbers. And know too, if you remember what Dr. Watson was saying, those numbers are inflated in terms of those ranges based upon they know the issues associated with testing. Now, they probably don't know the Harvey County issues associated with that. So
and I have a problem taking these positive numbers. I do, and I like math, believe it or not, and I'm for that. I think we need to have numbers and math come into play. We don't need to be picking things out of the air. But if I'm going to have 34 positives and hundreds of negatives floating out there not accounted for, that's not accurate numbers to base your math on, in my opinion. And I don't say that I have an actual negative number that we need to plug in, but it's not complete data to run these numbers.
So just for tonight's sake, regardless, if that middle criteria, the percentage were yellow or orange, according to our committee mode of operations, it's both yellow.
We're still yellow.
It's yellow either way, whether it's yellow or orange. So
I think it's just something to make to light, and I'm not throwing the health department under the bus. I know they're completely understaffed, and there's not enough people, there's not enough time. They're doing a huge amount of work with contact tracing, which is just overwhelming. I'm not sure how they're doing it. And I'm not placing blame on anyone, but I just want to bring to light that nobody knew that these negatives weren't accounted for. So it's some things to kind of just keep an eye on.
Sure.
And to consider. And when those numbers fall off, I think we're all going to celebrate, hopefully, that they're gone. So that would be good for our community. But I guess for my own peace of mind and to just put it out there, these numbers aren't complete.
Well, and just like a week ago, well, when those last Monday, when we met last Monday, they had to put that information in, right? And like over the course of like a 24-hour period, those numbers fluctuated tremendously. That's why you just have to pick that point in time and make that decision. And then if they change dramatically, then we have to get together again and make a different decision, if it's a negative for sure.
And I'm fine with that, I'm fine with fluctuations, but I just want to make sure that we're getting complete information as much as possible. And if they're not accounting for negatives because they don't have the resources to do that, I would like to know that. And that there's a caveat to that at some point, should this happen again. Hopefully it won't.
Mallory, are you saying just clusters they're not counting negatives?
No, just with the most recent one.
Just
When
with that
there were
one.
clusters at a care home, that the health department had a hand in that, so they knew the positives, they knew the negatives, that was totally taken care of.
So going forward, % positive should be accurate, it's just in this one cluster.
Until, when this falls off,
Okay.
hopefully it'll be okay, but this affects us either way.
I was gonna suggest if we're uncomfortable with the 2-week positive % number for this week because of that issue that you found, we could use the 2-week cumulative county incident rate instead just this week, since the number of cases isn't in question.
That would be red. I mean, you're talking about that per 100,000?
Yeah. Again, we can't make the decision based on the outcomes. We have to
Yeah.
make the decision.
He said make our decision on the three criteria.
But that's why I would always
That's why
realize
I'm
just on the
suggesting
numbers,
it's
and that way you don't have to worry about bringing that uncertainty. If there's uncertainty, it's not our uncertainty, we're making that decision based upon what we agree upon to make that. I understand your concerns associated with that, but, you know, what Angela's saying to me is accurate in that we don't want to start, you know, bringing in, because folks will interpret that as us wanting to skew the data to get to a predetermined location.
And I'm
That's not what we
fine
want to
with
do.
staying with the three. I'm not saying we bring in the other two. I'm fine with staying with the three, but it's not an emotional thing. It is a number thing that
Sure.
there are not negatives that are shown. And I
That's
think
what
that
I'm
needs to
saying,
be
so if
taken
that
out.
is the case, and we don't feel comfortable using that criteria tonight because there's issues with the cluster, then we can't just base it off of, well, I guess we have two still. If we wanted to throw in a third criteria to base our decision off of tonight, we could use the incident rate per 100,000.
Or we can just take worst case scenario that we're actually 12.4, which is an orange, and we still end up with yellow overall.
Right, and I'm fine with that, because I'm fine with that, but I just think we needed to kind of look at it as a whole, because in our community, this was the biggest cluster that we've dealt with. Like I said, I hope we don't have any more of them. It was a good practice for us, unfortunately, and we're gonna tweak things and change things as they come and go. And I'm fine using those three pieces, but I just wish there was more clarity. If we're going to be using this, I wish there was more clarity.
So was the positive percent rate before this cluster close to this number? Does anybody remember?
Well, it fluctuated too.
It changed.
We've kind of been riding just under 10% for a while, but it goes up
It
and.
can, it can over 10, but
It
it
depends on the
hasn't.
day.
I don't remember a 12 within the last 2 weeks, but it probably has.
I don't think we've seen it this high, but like you said, numbers change, so.
So,
But that
So
cluster,
we're-
if we look at this, that cluster moved us to orange from yellow, right?
When you include the negatives. Yeah.
but I guess really the bottom line here is, are we all in agreement that we're in yellow?
We're in yellow.
Yeah.
Yellow?
So, and we're determining for September 3rd through the 11th.
That is that. You probably want to make a motion to do that, so.
Wait, just so I'm sure what we're doing, so on the attendance, we're green, on the percent positive, we're orange, and on the trend, we are green, yellow?
We're green, yellow.
Green, yellow,
We're
okay.
green, yellow.
And that, and on this, that equals out to a yellow.
Yes.
What were our numbers on the trend? You said them tonight for
Down 5, I just let people.
67 to 64.
I've heard so many numbers.
Three.
Down 3.
Okay, so, a motion to,
So I move to approve the yellow column of mode of instruction for September 3 through 11.
move the second, any further discussion? All those in favor? 7-0. Anything else, sir?
Personnel.
Oh, we have new business.
Oh, yeah, we got the, I'm sorry. One more item, sorry. Personnel report.
I am to approve the August 25th, 2020 personnel report as presented.
Second.
I'll give it to Angela. See you later. All those in favor? 7-0. And now I'll take it.
I move to adjourn.
Give me a second, all in favor? 7-0. Very good.
Johnny on the spot for that one.
Oh, yeah.
I'd just like to know why nobody else got yelled at for asking a question tonight.
Mallory.